Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our event, Bridging Digital Fault Lines, Technological Sovereignty in the Open Internet. So I first want to welcome you all. This is the first event that the Observer Research Foundation is doing in association with Google, and we're very happy about this new partnership. You will be getting invitations for about 3 more events before we actually get into sci-fi in October, as you all know. So do keep a lookout on your emails. Now, we have a lot of really good speakers with us today to get into this topic. I won't read out their entire descriptions because you all have a printout, but just to introduce them. We have with us in Parminder Singh, who is Executive Director for IT for Change. We have Yolynd Lobo, who is Director India for the Software Alliance, BSA Software Alliance. We have with us Mr. Mahesh Uppal, who is Director of ComFirst. Mr. Chandrasekhar, who is President of NASSCOM, as you all know. Chinmayi Arun, who is Research Director of the Center for Communication Governance at the National Law University in Delhi. We have Chetan Krishnaswamy, who is Country Head, Public Policy for Google India. Mr. Deepak Maheshwari is with us, who is Head of Government Affairs for Symantec. Mr. Gajendra Upadhyay should be joining us soon. He is Director, Regional Business Development at Afilias. And finally, to my right is Dr. Anupam Chander, who we are happy to welcome again to ORF, who is the Director of the California International Law Center and the Martin Luther King Jr. Hall Research Scholar. So without wasting too much time, I'm going to request Dr. Chander to actually set the tone for today's conversation. He will take about 8 to 10 minutes to really define the topic and tell us the various nuances of this topic. And then I will call upon our various experts in a random order of appearance to come and give us about 5 to 6 minutes of their views, after which I will ask them if they have any questions for each other, comments to add, and we will open it up to the floor for discussion. And we want it to be quite an interactive session. So, Professor Chander, to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mahima. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. So, a BRICS internet, the Euro cloud, the Iranian internet, governments across the world eager to increase control over the web are tearing it apart. The World Wide Web may be on its last legs. Iran seeks to develop an Iranian internet free of Western influence or domestic dissent. The Australian government places restrictions on health data leaving the country. South Korea requires mapping data to stay within the country. Vietnam insists on a local copy of Vietnamese data so that it can go after potential dissenters. The last century's non-tariff barriers to goods have reappeared as firewalls blocking international services. Legitimate global anxieties over surveillance and security are justifying governmental interventions that break apart the World Wide Web without, I will argue, enhancing either privacy or security. So, driven by concerns over privacy, security, surveillance, and law enforcement, governments are erecting borders in cyberspace. The first generation of internet border controls sought to keep information from coming into a country, from Nazi paraphernalia to copyright infringing material. The new generation of internet border controls seeks to keep information from going outside a country. The goal is to keep information within the country. The issue is critical to the future of internet and international trade. Data localization threatens the possibility of outsourcing services, whether to Bangalore or to Accra, to Manila, or even Silicon Valley. Theoretically, it expands the conversation about international internet regulation from efforts to prevent data from flowing in through censorship to include efforts to prevent data from flowing out through data localization. And I want to give three as a mnemonic, 3 F's to this process. First, I think it's futile. Only the very largest and the most law-abiding companies will indeed follow rules of data localization. Because on the internet, it is very easy to evade data localization as a requirement. And indeed, foreign companies that are concerned about this requirement won't build out local infrastructures, but they will simply avoid building out local infrastructures just so they can continue evading the extra costs of localization. Second, the second F is what someone else, Hosuk Lee Makiyama, has named friendly fire. So I argue that it's friendly fire on economic development. The Make in India policy will be undermined by data localization. It makes it harder for startups or SMEs or even large companies to build atop of global services. And it will lead to other governments reciprocating in turn. That is, to avoid sending data from about their people outside their countries to places like India. Finally, and I think this is just as crucial, it not only harms economic development, it undermines free speech. One of the amazing promises of the internet is the liberalization of a global flow of information and the benefits that we all receive from this. Data localization makes it easier for authoritarian governments to borrow a page from liberal governments like India to enforce against their local populations rules that essentially allow the local authorities to find dissenters and jail them quite easily. So with those opening remarks, I'll turn the floor over to my esteemed guests, my esteemed colleagues on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Chander. I think before I open it to all our various experts, it would be a good, it's a good time to reflect on what actually we're talking about and the concept of one internet. And I would really appreciate if some of our experts could really define what they think is one internet, whether it means, as has been suggested, I think, in some ways in your book, a harmonization of laws and regulations, because when we talk about Australia restricting its healthcare data, is that what we mean, that the data regulations across all countries should be the same? Or when we mean one internet, are we really referring to countries like China or Iran or Korea who might want to actually physically disassociate themselves in the core infrastructure that all the countries share? So, data localization was brought into the public imagination, a lot more to do with national security when the Snowden revelations came out, but the more sensible argument against it is often economic. And you see a lot of businesses within national borders telling their governments that if we are mandating others to set up local service in our country, we'll have to do the same in those countries, thereby our costs are rising. So I do think this concept has so many multifacets, and I'm really happy to have so many different people joining us who can address some of those different facets. So Mr. Chandrasekhar, if you don't mind, may I first call upon you to give your remarks on the subject.
Thank you. I think the question that we are deliberating today is arguably one of the most important questions confronting humanity today. I don't want to sound as if I'm exaggerating the importance, but undoubtedly considering the enormous impact that the internet and through it the availability of knowledge on tap, and more pertinently, knowledge or information that you need when you need it, has changed almost everything that we do. This is well known, and I won't belabor that point. But I think underlying these benefits has been certain very important attributes of the internet which are today under threat. And these attributes are a free flow of information, a free movement of technology, a free movement of data, and also a free movement of skilled personnel. This is what keeps the wheels of the internet moving and makes it what it is today. But these principles of the internet being borderless and the internet being anonymous, while they have brought tremendous benefits, like all good things in life, have also revealed an underside which is not necessarily all good. And secondly, like every other freedom, has shown that there have to be some bounds, and unbridled freedom does have consequences which most societies may not be prepared to pay for. In the absence of any structured or internationally agreed formulation to resolve these issues, we are seeing increasing fragmentation, which was very well brought out by Professor Chander. And I think there are big dangers in this, precisely because every country is adopting some kind of restriction, some kind of localization, and that is happening in very disaggregated fashion. And at the end, if this process continues, then the internet as we know it perhaps would not really exist. So what's the core issue? The core issue is that governments do need certain degrees of control over what happens within the borders of the geography that they are supposed to govern. I suppose that this could be taken as axiomatic, even though it is sometimes even these basics are open to question, particularly when you deal with governments which may not share some of the political and philosophical moorings that we see in many parts of the developed world. The next point is that as we look at what the governments need to do and the current processes which are there, most of the time governments which run under the rule of law have laws which determine in what conditions governments can have access to information and where the boundary between lawful access by the government and privacy of the citizen, where that boundary lies. These bounds do vary from country to country, but the problem begins when you step across the sovereign border, and in the internet that is most often the case. And that's where then jurisdictional clashes and the limits of sovereignty come in. And the current arrangements which are under the multilateral legal assistance treaties are seen as cumbersome, archaic, extremely inefficient, and therefore unsatisfactory from the point of view of governments which have to deal with real-time and often explosive situations on the ground, both in respect of individuals as well as with respect to entire segments of the population. We've seen that in India as well. A lot of the debates on internet governance have tended to really more or less split into two camps, one being the multi-stakeholder camp, in which a loosely defined multi-stakeholder group is supposed to formulate views on how the internet should be run and how it should be managed, etc. And the other is the multilateral point of view, where governments have a dominant say, which certainly is not acceptable to most open societies and societies governed by the rule of law. So the question I think for debate here is that as we are looking at some of these issues, what are the kind of controls which government should legitimately expect to have? Where should those boundaries be drawn between privacy and lawful access? And how do you have a system which is internationally acceptable and binding, but which can work efficiently in accordance with these principles? And finally, how do you actually achieve a consensus which is binding on these principles? I think these are all extremely complex issues, and I do believe that a country like India, which has a mix of high technological capability, where we have begun using the internet to leapfrog some of the developmental challenges, and so we understand how technology can be leveraged. We have a strong IT industry which does have a strong economic stake in maintaining the openness of the internet, again a point which Professor Chander referred to. And at the same time, we have an open society plus challenges which any government in a pluralistic society has to deal with, and we've seen those issues also. So I think that some of these perspectives need to be deliberated, and we need to see what is the best manner in which the balance can be struck between preserving the attributes of the internet which have made it what it is, and enabling the governments to get the kind of access when it is needed in accordance with the law, which in turn would have to be in accordance with certain internationally accepted principles. I think that balance and trying to arrive at some ground rules for striking the right balance is perhaps what would work. In my understanding and in my experience, I do not believe that simply beating the drum of a multi-stakeholder approach without defining in what manner the governments would get the kind of minimal access that they need to would not work. And therefore, I think defining this balance is a critical aspect of finding a solution. I think I'll stop there, and I look forward to the rest of the deliberations on this interesting and yet complex issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I think you set the right tone for me to bring Google and Chetan into the conversation. You know, the boundaries between privacy and lawful access, and we do hear big social media companies and companies that keep all our data, you know, across the world, caught up in these incidents between governments and companies. So maybe you can shed some light on your views.
So as Mr. Chandrasekhar and Dr. Chander, very eloquently, outlined the multi-dimensional impact of data localization. The impact it would have on the economy of the country in terms of, putting businesses on the back foot. The impact it would have on the user community. Let's not forget that you have a country here which has a growing internet user base. So let's not take away choices from them, right? In the name of bringing in strong arm regulations, let's not take away the choices that these 300 million internet users today, sort of yearn for. And thirdly, what would be pertinent to sort of look at and perhaps have a more stimulating discussion around is the need for governments to be a little more creative, to be a little more focused in considering the macro picture while, securing data from these companies, right? And in this context, yesterday, the Economic Times had an interesting report. I'm sure a lot of you would have read it. And essentially, the focus was on startups in the hinterlands, right? So there were 4 or 5 companies that the newspaper picked up, which were on the growth path, and 2 came across as being extremely novel, at least from an internet usage or deployment standpoint. One was a company called RoboSoft, which is based in Udupi in Dakshin Kannada, which makes applications, which creates games to ride on the Apple platform. The second one was an online tutorial out of a place called Junjun in Rajasthan. And what struck me the most, and both of these companies are doing exceedingly well, revenues are huge, ambitious plans for the future. And for a minute, imagine if by mandate or government fiat, they were supposed to move away from the cloud-based model that they pursue at this point in time, and perhaps need to resort to a more insular kind of a model. Would they be able to sort of grow? Would their ambitions be equally sort of daring? Is the question that one has to mull over. And very clearly, once a data localization regime takes over, the most severely impacted would be the small enterprises, would be the startups that we read about yesterday. And the basis for their growth is cross-border data exchange, which leads to more international customers, which leads to more inventive ways of growing their business. So it does deserve some amount of thought there, purely again from an economic standpoint. What about innovation? You have several companies today which are building applications and services which ride on these global platforms. And tomorrow, if we have a sort of a draconian regime, obviously it's going to pose a huge problem. And access to funds would be another huge issue, right? So what would excite the VC community to come in and start looking at a startup and look at the startup community if there is a whole bunch of regulations which acts as a severe impediment. So in addition to this, we also have large businesses which would be impacted, as Mr. Chandrasekhar rightly mentioned. The success of our IT and ITS industry historically has been the seamless manner in which transactions have occurred globally. And obviously, having a sort of a data localization regime would create a huge problem here. And the users would be severely impacted. You will not have companies come in aggressively and provide the same services and products that would be proliferating, the other countries, or that would be, that would be being that are being deployed in other countries. So the user base would be and the customers would be severely impacted. And also, let's not forget that internet applications today are constantly evolving, and the nature of these applications is to work closely and interact with each other. And data localization would essentially mean segregation of data for different applications, and the number one casualty there would be interoperability. So I think there is a need for us to look at some of these ramifications. And lastly, when it comes to access by the government, policymakers across the world should understand that the internet as a medium is global in nature, is distributed, and obviously, it has never sort of respected physical boundaries, which legitimately is a problem today. There is a need for us to be concerned about how governments go about maintaining a certain element of security and ensure that there is a degree of jurisdictional powers that they exercise. But end of the day, the answer is not merely to localize all data in one particular place. And as Dr. Chander mentions in his paper, this would lead to what is known as the honeypot problem, where you have foreign powers which would easily access information and data from one particular location, rather than a cloud-based sort of a distributed model where data and information is in various repositories across the globe. So keeping all of this in mind, the belief is that the solution has to be political, the solution has to be technical, certainly not regulatory.
Thank you. Yolynd, I wonder if I can bring you in over here because we're talking not just the impact on users but also on businesses.
So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just thread a few thoughts that I've been hearing around the table. And obviously, there is definitely that impact on business. But I think the major concern with government has always been when you talk about an invasion, and the idea is how do I have better control at the end of the day? And I think it's something that's come down through generations. It's the ability to put up walls. And with the internet, you're talking about putting up of digital walls. But is that really addressing the situation at hand? So let's look at the security concerns when we're talking about that come from, that govern or push people towards data localization. Is security really a function of the location of the data or the infrastructure that is supporting and managing the data? If you look internally, and I think we have some very good examples of what is happening within India. If you look at the Reserve Bank of India today, it allows banks to share IT resources, to do outsourcing, to use cloud computing, as long as there's due diligence, as long as there is an adherence to the, and risk mitigation strategies in place. Are we saying today that the RBI has lesser control of our financial data and the monies that we have in this market? I don't think that's the issue. So I think what we need to do is really step back and identify the issues and the problems. What we need to drive together with partnership with the industry, because like my friend from Google really mentioned, it is technology that is driving these changes. If you have a policy that is not in sync with technology, like my Dr. Chander mentioned, will outpace it and will create the back doors to circumvent it at the end of the day. I think it's important to consider the development of standards, international standards that will lead to interoperability and security. And I think it's very easy to see, like we've all talked about, the impact from business, and to really sum that up, is how do we make the data come into India? What is it that we build in terms of an infrastructure? I think the critical aspects for building data centers in India is that you want it to be redundant, you want it to be resilient, and you want it to be reliable. I think that's another focus area, is how do we put that in place and how do we create that infrastructure in place? Because today, as we operate in a digital economy, the backlash happens very quickly. It's not something that will take decades to happen. You've got a business process management industry that is flourishing, commands a high percentage of the GDP, commands a high percentage of the export industry. And without this very basis to allow for cross-border data flow, you're not really going to have an industry that can grow any further. You're going to stem your own industry in its foot right now. So I think those are my two recommendations, I would say. One, what are the concerns, and is bringing up digital walls really the answer to that concerns and answers and addresses that issue? And how do we look at it from a business proposition that I think we as Indians have not only the talent and the resources to capitalize on?
Thank you so much, Yolynd. Parminder, if I may sort of call on you at this point, I think it's a really good point that was raised that policy needs to be in sync with technology. And as the internet grows, India needs to be competitive, and we need to allow for an environment that also encourages people to bring their data to us. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on the discussion.
Okay, I would respond to this particular one, but try to frame it in a larger intervention which I sought to make. I think the way we look at both technology sovereignty or data sovereignty and the open internet and data needs to be spoken of in a larger social manner rather than just one of what happens to free trade or industry manner, and that's what I'm going to try to do very quickly though. I think largely we have been treating this issue from an open trade framework and a very kind of uncritical look at an open trade framework, which is not really what is the received wisdom in developing countries, for one, but still in that framework. And second is the freedom of expression framework, which also has certain geopolitics about it. I'm going to go in those directions. And the counter discourse is on privacy, which is again mostly a civil and a political right side of it. I think what is happening is we should look at a larger social tectonics which are happening here. And And the way basic concepts like sovereignty are under strain. And from there, also see what data is doing to our societies to be able to come back and then address this question. Sovereignty is normally largely seen in these debates as statism, large intervention of state in every walk of life, which is normally considered bad for all open societies, and all of us will share this sentiment here. But I think sovereignty is not just that. Our constitution defines sovereignty as the control of the people over whatever happens to them. It's a collective political expression and right to use the coercive powers of agency called the state to enforce that particular thing. I think here the way the internet is changing our social systems across the borders, the issue of rule of law and people's sovereignty becomes important. It's just not statism, and let's separate statism from sovereignty. Sovereignty is a bigger democratic concept. I'm coming here actually from a meeting with NGO Mobile Crashes, and we're discussing about local data ownerships in a community, how the community should own its data. And I told them I'm going to a workshop on data sovereignty. And there we were talking about the community's sovereignty of data and how actually state takes up the data which actually is produced in the community. And how if community had the data, then they would be doing much more things, and that's their democratic right. So I need to just be trying to place this thing, sovereignty in that sense, and that loss has to be seen in a political level and not just from one of economics of certain sectors which of course are important stakeholders in the whole debate. So there's issue of rule of law, and rule of law is important. We have come many, many centuries from when rule of law did not exist, and we have made a lot of political development, and we need to stick to that. And second is, what is data? Data again is typically taken from this cloud computing, privacy angle, and I think again we have to see it from something bigger. And there are three main processes which are happening in our society which is fundamentally changing it. One is digitization, second is networking, and third is datafication. Three together are transforming all social sectors. Like Monsanto now says it's a data company. It has field-wise climate information, soil graphics, about neighborhood patterns, data, it controls data, and that's what the agriculture system is going to become. And a very superficial scan will tell you that health, education, transport, everything has become datafied. And therefore, whole social systems are transforming. Earlier, data companies are migrating into areas like automobile, health. So this huge social systems transformations are taking place, which is changing in the manner in which our social activities take place. They are global in the nature, and the issue is about rule of law on those systems, and data is either the DNA of it or an oil of the new economy or whatever you say, but it's fundamentally important. And I think these issues have to be seen at this level before we come to their sectoral economic implications, which again are hugely important and more important for India, for certain industries being in the forefront of India's growth. Very quickly, what does this entail for me is that sovereignty is important. Either people will do it over national borders and therefore limit the data and connectivity patterns to national borders, which I don't like, none of us here do. The other way is shared sovereignty, whether it is global levels, when we have to enter into certain kind of agreement, certain kind of principles, and agree to certain kind of shared sovereignties, because rule of law is important and that cannot be compromised, or some. And that's not happening. If I don't have time to review what's happening at the global level, there is simply, free-for-all kind of system. We won't have any laws, any principles, and the world would now be a lawless jungle, which is not possible for a country like India, with a huge, huge amount of marginalized populations, which need political support to assert their economic, social, cultural rights. So we need to have global principles. As Chandrasekhar ji said, we need to do it now. In absence of them, there would be localization, and there's no two ways about it. Otherwise, and this is other things which may happen, some countries may enter into agreements which could be like free zones, free economic zones, like a BRICS free economic zones, because BRICS agree on certain economic issues, and they agree to enforce each other's economic rules over one another's and give them rights, and then these free economic zones form on the internet. But again, these priorities are as important as economic priorities, which have been kind of highlighted by my previous speakers, all of which I agree with, but I am trying to bring a political dimension to this issue. Thank you.
Chinmayi, if I may call upon you, we're talking about global principles and, maybe the Manila principles and other kinds of work going on to
Yeah, this is actually a really useful place for me to come in because Parminder has brought up an issue which is something that I'd like to highlight as well. So as an academic, I always announce it, especially when there are more practical people at the table. I take it as my prerogative to be as abstract as I like. And so the first thing that I'd like to highlight is that there are a lot of warring norms over here, a lot of different goals that are at tension with each other. So for example, we have on one hand to consider the idea of individual or citizens' privacy, and this is around the world, including in countries that don't believe that their citizens should have a right to privacy. Citizens, at least according to international human rights norms, should have these rights both against their own government, against other countries' government, and against companies that may choose to take their data, even in contexts in which the citizens don't understand that they have a right to privacy, because sometimes, the ways in which your data can be used can affect you and you may not see it coming. It's a bounded rationality problem over there. So there's that to consider on one hand. Then there is the question that the other speakers highlighted very ably, which is the sovereignty and control question. So governments can legitimately say that that they have the right to regulate how information should be processed. That's one. The second is that they might also legitimately say that some kinds of information affect their national security. They may also retain the right to spy on other countries. We have got a rich history of international espionage, so governments may argue that the way in which they treat data belonging to other countries is also in some ways their own prerogative. Also just to bring in something that I've been reading internally, we often imagine that governments are sort of clear about the privacy norms that they follow, but even internally political parties have a conflict about how they treat privacy norms in different contexts. To illustrate this for you quite clearly, I was reading the news a few days back, and I was very happy to see that the BJP is very upset that the Aam Aadmi Party is thinking about thinking of buying surveillance equipment in Delhi. And so my reaction was, if only you would extend that to your own central government policy, I'd be absolutely delighted. But the truth is that if you put people in different positions, different positions of power, and their perspective to data and to privacy and to human rights changes according to, I guess, which side of the table they're playing from. And the final, of course, is that companies are again at this odd position where on one hand, collection of data, a lot of information enables growth and enables the providing of excellent services. We've all been recipients of, for example, without Google Maps, I would get lost even in my own neighborhood, forget other countries. And so, the way in which services are designed has a lot to do with the collection of information, but we cannot forget that the history of science has always had to deal with this fine line between how much information you need for advancement of science versus how much information or how much experimentation can lead to very serious violation of human rights. And so even technology has to consider the ethics of its own advancement. So to my mind, the trouble over here is partly that there are political tensions, but partly also that there is a lack of clarity and a lack of a sort of a unified norm of what is acceptable and what is not, a baseline norm. Now, I know that the politics of this makes it very, very difficult for everybody to arrive at consensus, but I consider this that if we were to deal with a context, and this is completely abstract, I'm sorry, I'm aware that this is never going to happen. John Rawls said that actually the most just solution that you could come up with is usually arrived at if you're operating from behind a veil of ignorance. So that's when you're operating from a context in which you don't know what side you're going to be on, you don't know which position you're going to be in, and then you decide what norm is the fairest norm for the world. So in some ways, I guess that I chose to be an academic after being a corporate lawyer, because I feel like we operate in this little vacuum, given that given its distance from a lot of what's going on, it permits us sometimes to be independent, but this does not apply to all of us. I also think that it's a good thing that we finally have a UN Special Rapporteur for Privacy, and I'm hoping that the work that he or she comes out with, this person hasn't been appointed as yet. Perhaps that will clarify a little bit to all concerned what is meant by a global privacy norm, because this is a twofold problem, right? One is that what are the global rights that people can legitimately press for when governments are negotiating with each other? Do they go with the European articulation of what privacy means? Do they go with the US articulation of what privacy means? How much paternalism is okay? Nobody has any idea. If governments have no idea, how can we expect companies to have an idea? And so I feel like in that context, it's also a self-regulation problem, which is that we say in the abstract that we need companies to respect privacy, but if we have different notions of what amounts to privacy, it creates a serious global problem. So I guess that in conclusion, I would say that I agree with everybody at this table. And I feel like if, I know that this is not going to be a speedy process, but I don't see this deadlock being resolved without baseline privacy norms.
Thank you. Mr. Maheshwari, if I may ask you to step in. Protecting privacy when we still have abstract notions of privacy, how is it working?
Thanks, Mahima. So firstly, I would say that we need to look at this whole thing, as Parminder mentioned, that in the larger social context. And one of the contexts in the country is this, that we are an agrarian society, but a service economy. And that has its own conundrum in terms of where the government revenues come from and where the governments get their power to sort of exercise their franchise on their people, because that comes through the votes. And India is, I would say, rather unique in that type of context. Of course, there are many other countries where I would say manufacturing is a bigger thing, but in terms of service, which is called the tertiary sector, and whereas the society being still mostly engaged in the primary sector as far as the livelihoods are concerned, and that has its own implications. So that's the first thing. And when we look at the internet usage, I mean, right from the early 90s when the internet actually started in India, even before BSNL started on 15th August 1995, we did have internet access in the country. And some of the people in this room who are sitting around the table were part of that at EarNet and other type of initiatives to get connected with with the 5 IITs and ISC Bangalore in 91, 92 that time, with some of the universities in the US and elsewhere. Now, what has happened over the years, however, is after the web came around 94 or so, and 93, 94, and then the sudden growth that we have seen. And oftentimes people conflate internet with the web, which I think is technically not correct, but for practical purposes, a lot of times it does happen. And at the internet level itself, if we see the basic internet technologies, they are there, and of course there have been certain improvements. Now we do have IPv6 and other things, but the fact is the basic architecture hasn't changed much. At the same time, the applications, the services which can evolve on the internet has been evolving at a very rapid pace. And I just want to give one particular instance. On 15 January 1998, when the government had announced the original internet policy, it had defined a certain type of services. And some of those services, you may actually think that I'm referring to Archie's Comics, because the name of the services which were actually mentioned in that license were Archie's, Gopher, Veronica, by name. I'm not joking, okay? And this was on 15 January 1998. And however, and of course, the other implication was that any new service that anybody would wanted to offer, of course, it did offer email, it did have World Wide Web, and some of the other names. But the other thing was that for any other service, you'll have to come to the government and seek the permission for whatever the new service that you would like to offer. So there was some process which followed thereafter between 15 January 1998 and 6 November 1998. And on 6 November 1998, the government did announce a new policy where the new definition was services or service means all types of internet services except telephony on internet, which of course got also opened up subsequently. But at that point of time, this was a definition. And why I'm mentioning this is that this gives us a context about how the government itself looked at the way the internet could evolve, because nobody knew at that point of time. And I would say that we are probably as clueless as that today as we were at that point of time. The only thing which was predictable was that we don't know what all and when and who will come up with these type of innovations. And so the choice was simple. Either you decide through a regulated process what all and how things will happen, or you just provide a broad framework, and within that broad framework, let people come up with different innovations, different services. And that's how India made a choice at that point of time. And I would say that that's something which is worth emulating even today. So that's one thing. Second thing is, Chetan did mention about 300 million users. I would say that we should not look at 300 million internet users, we should look at 300 million internet providers. And the reason is what Alvin Toffler had talked almost 45 years back, the concept of prosumer. I think internet is the finest example of what a prosumer is, that everybody is a producer as well as so a producer or a provider as well as a user. So I think we should look at these things in that context. The third thing is, as Mr. Chandrasekhar did mention, the government, so whatever the government's minimal access considerations are there, I think it would be a useful discussion and a dialogue once those norms itself, not in terms of how things have to be done, but what is it that needs to be done. So let's say a particular type of access, a particular type of data which is needed, and under what context. Once that is defined, I think largely the government should leave not just to the market forces, I would say, but I would say to the society at large, as Parminder mentioned, in terms of how people comply with that, and of course having some sort of a framework for the self-regulation, as Chinmayi mentioned, for people to comply with that type of regime. The last thing that I would say is that, yes, internet has been around for quite some time, but when the Government of India itself wanted to give a name for government cloud, it went back into the millennia and found a useful reference to Meghdut, but instead of calling it Meghdut, it was called Meghraj. And I just want to read out a part of a poem from the late Rashtrakavi Ramdhari Singh Dinkar, whose centenary was recently celebrated just a couple of weeks back. It's titled Pakshi aur Badal, and one of the things he says is, "Jo ek mahadesh se dusre mahadesh ko jate hain." Although it's a very short poem, but I'm still trying to excerpt it further. And then he says, "Aur ek desh ka bhaap dusre desh mein pani ban kar girta hai." So in terms of cloud, what he mentioned, that you have water in one country, it becomes it gets vaporized, it becomes a cloud, and finally the rains happen elsewhere. And what India is doing is a lot of that sort, that we get data from elsewhere, we process it here, send it back in a different form perhaps. And I think the similar type of access we also need from people, not just, and it's not just about cross-border, but I would say it is within the borders also. Because tomorrow it should not happen that a state of one particular state says, okay, my data should not go to another state. So it's not just about different countries. I think it's also about different states or boundaries in whichever manner that we look at in terms of geographical boundaries within the country also. All the same, yes, there are concerns on legitimate data access by the government for law enforcement, surveillance, and for national security purposes. And for those things, it would be useful to define what is it that is needed, and then let us see how people should respond to that, how people can actually comply with those type of requirements. Because first it should be why is it we need that thing, then it should be about what is it that we need to do, accomplish that, and then the process comes about who does it, how do we go about it, when do we go about it, and that type of thing. There was a reference to MLAT process. Yes, it's not just India, other countries are also equally vocal about their dissatisfaction with the MLAT, but unfortunately this is something where the industry does not have a direct response or a direct role, but yes, industry can do whatever it can, but again, it is basically an intergovernmental issue. So I think as far as the MLAT process is concerned, all of us do agree that yes, this is something that does require review and revision perhaps, and that's an exercise again worth due. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Uppal, if I may call, I know you've also been following India's internet policy evolving over the years. I'm wondering if you have some thoughts to add.
Sure. Thank you. As you can imagine, by the time we come to the last speaker, almost everything of substance and relevance has been said. So forgive me if I sound repetitive, but I'll try not to. I think where there is no disagreement whatsoever is that between, say, governments and IT or internet companies is the importance of the internet. There is, both sides are absolutely, I think, clear that there is not only a huge opportunity that is on offer, but that this opportunity, if it was nurtured and allowed to to grow could actually mean a huge difference to the welfare of their populations in general, and of course for companies, huge amounts of profits. So clearly there is that commonality of interests. And as Chetan said, the cloud also is a huge opportunity, and I think any country which ignores what it the huge opportunity, if you like, of the cloud really is a great risk of faces accepts a risk which I think is unnecessary. And it's also clear that there is this issue of what Mr. Chandrasekhar talked about, unbridled freedom of the internet. And it is, I don't think anybody would disagree that the consequences of that unbridled freedom to a large extent befall the state. And to that extent, the state, in as far as it has to pick up the pieces, whether it is at the level of safety, whether it is at level of protecting interests that cannot protect themselves, and so on and so forth, it has a clear responsibility. In fact, in most cases, it is elected to perform those responsibilities. And most of those concerns, therefore, are legitimate. However, as Dr. Chander mentioned, whatever the states have attempted to do in recent times, whether it is on the privacy front or on the security front, has been far from successful. It just isn't working. In fact, both the threats to privacy and the threats to security seem not only to continue, but seem to be magnifying. So clearly, that is not working. And also, to that extent, what is also clear is that location, or localization of data, despite being a very, very attractive option, clearly is not something that will allow the full benefits of internet to be enjoyed by people. And clearly the potential of internet would be, in my view, quite seriously curtailed if we insisted on localization. However, we must recognize that localization, even were it to exist, would be a limited solution. Because, I mean, as at a very trivial level, for instance, I can just, Apple can happily help me clear all my iPad of all data. The data might be localized on my phone, my device, or on my Android device. I don't even need to, it can remotely be dealt with, erased, or whatever. So the truth, so the point as far as localization is, so the localization by itself, I think, is a very, very limited solution, and I doubt, excuse me, if that is going to really help. But what is important is control. And I think the real issue in internet data, particularly data of a sensitive kind, whether it is relating to privacy, security, is really of control. Who and under what circumstances can exercise control? And I think that is one area where I believe the industry itself and the governments have not worked together, because they are actually the most qualified to deal with these things. These things are actually fairly subtle issues, and we routinely see two things. One, that the governments make a fool of themselves by having rules which, for example, what Deepak talked about, Deepak Maheshwari, which would sound absurd to anybody who is deeply involved. And at the same time, you have a situation, where the industry seems to be totally unaware or unwilling to engage with what the government's concerns are and government's responsibility are. So my feeling is, given the huge amount of brain power in the industry, I think the need for of the hour, I think, is very, very active engagement between the governments as well as the industry. And that, I think, would be the way to mitigate the risks that currently confront both sides. There is a serious risk to industry if this whole focus on localization was to go out of hand and was to splinter, as it were, the internet. And certainly the governments, given their responsibilities, will have no option other than to blunder their way through it. So I do believe that the real issue is control. The real issue is legitimate control. We need to ensure that this control is not exercised by people who do not have legitimacy. And second, that this problem will, as a historian friend of mine says, these questions will just not go away. The questions of the kind of risks that governments or the people that they represent face will not go away. And unless that engagement does take place, we will have this question going round and round. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Chandler, now let me give you the small task of responding to some of the ideas that you've heard before we open it up to the audience for an interactive Q&A session.
Thank you very much. Thank you to this esteemed panel for brilliant comments. I was busily jotting down insights, and I don't hope to address all of them. I just wanted to, I thought it might be easier to kind of respond by imagining a data localization policy in place, right? Let's look at what the world would look like if we had data localization, that is. I think the first thing you'd see is if one large country introduced broad data localization requirements, other countries would follow suit. And so one of the ways that countries often think about these practices is, oh, we'll put this policy in place and foreign companies will now come rushing in to serve our consumers and will benefit dramatically because foreign companies will come in. But they often don't think about the fact that other countries will respond in kind, changing their policies and so licensing the reciprocal actions by countries across the world. So the first possible response would be then to prohibit the offshoring of information to foreign countries for processing. And so customer information, information about particular data subjects would now no longer be permitted to be sent into a foreign country. And so this would, of course, undermine the vast amount of industry in this country, which depends upon offshoring of data, which depends upon the free flow of information across borders. Second, and I too read the Economic Times story about startup country with great interest, and so I'm sure many of you saw it, but the thesis was we typically think about a few kind of centers of innovation in India, Bangalore, Hyderabad, a few other leading centers. But the Economic Times said, in fact, there's actually a lot more innovation happening across the country, and it looked in more remote parts of the country, including very small towns, certainly by Indian standards, that were involved in kind of innovation. And generally, the internet has allowed new companies to come up without needing a huge amount of capital to create an infrastructure for distributing information across the country or even the world. And that's a huge kind of unique situation that the internet has created that allows for small companies, a startup of 2 or 3 people, to suddenly grow and serve hundreds of thousands of people. And this is, again, because they rely and build upon a huge infrastructure that is provided, a platform that's provided across the world. And I've seen this across the world where people build out on Amazon Web Services or or Google's servers, or Google Maps, for example, with huge, I've been taking kind of internet car services, which are built atop Google Maps and allow people to create incredible services that allow individuals to transact on this kind of very micro level. You know, my payment will be 150 rupees, but it'll all be done through this kind of seamless global infrastructure, including, you know, my being able to contact the person, talk with the person, see a photo of that person, etc., around the world. Third, imagine another possible effect, which is the assumption is data localization will mean, again, that companies come rushing in, building out the local infrastructures. But what you might also see is companies saying, we'll just exclude this country from our service, right? And that has happened. So in Spain, there was this a copyright ruling that basically said, if you link to a news story, okay, you now need to pay the newspaper you are linking to for that news story link. Okay, not copying the story, you're linking to that story. And so the assumption in Spain was now our newspapers will become wealthy from all the links that Google, et cetera, will be paying for. Well, Google's response was, one, we make no money from these links. Two, we no longer offer this service in Spain. Okay, that was the simple result of that policy. Suddenly, the newspapers in Spain found that their traffic diminished tremendously. And so they actually were undermined by this policy that was designed, in fact, to bring them all these internet riches. And so I think a similar response might well happen. It won't happen throughout. I mean, sometimes the companies will say, yes, we'll build out the local infrastructure. I'm not saying that, you know, companies will all reject this, but you will see a lot of this that they say it's uneconomical. It's not justifiable as a cost matter to build out the local infrastructure to support this. And so yesterday, or actually 2 days ago, Google just announced an amazing service, which is Google Photos. So they will take your photos, and I've started doing this, you know, and I have a ton of photos. You know, I literally have 500 gigs of photos over the last, you know, more than a decade of taking photos. And so they now say that they'll take the unlimited storage of photos and videos. You know, the video cannot really be unlimited. I don't really understand that. But anyway, so I can easily imagine them saying, look, we do these servers, you know, this is across the world, and we can't build out this infrastructure here. Flickr has previously offered a terabyte of free storage of photos. And it's likely to say something along the lines of, well, I'm sorry, we're not able to offer this service in this country. We've seen this throughout the history of services, where because of some local regulation, it's essentially either illegal or cost prohibitive for a company to offer that service in a particular place. So I think if we think about the actual dynamic responses to data localization, we might see that it's likely to undermine economic advancement. Finally, I think, and this issue has been raised by a number of people, and I think this is a very important one, and Mahima, you asked about this, which is this kind of one world, and the desire then to have kind of government access to information, which is a very serious and important issue. Governments need to be able to access information, and they need to be able to access information abroad as well as within their country. Data localization suggests, this simple kind of wonderful scenario where we no longer will have to issue these MLAT requests asking for help from a foreign country. In fact, those MLAT requests will continue long after data localization. It's impossible in the internet, unless you stop communicating with anyone else, to not have information that is about one's own people stored abroad. That's going to continue to happen, even with data localization. The MLAT requests will have to continue. So the only solution is for all the countries, and I agree this has to be on an intergovernmental level, to agree to a more efficient MLAT system. India realizes that it will have to share information held in India. Europeans recognize that they will have to share information held in Europe. The Americans recognize that they will have to share information held in the United States, so that each of these governments can get the benefit of reciprocal treatment from foreign countries when they need the information. I think that is clearly the future, and the only way to deal with this is on a multilateral basis, not on some kind of misunderstanding that that process will no longer be necessary due to this kind of magic wand of data localization. Right? I've spoken too much, but thank you all for brilliant comments.
Thank you so much, sir. I think this is a good point to open it up to the audience. Just, sir.
Okay, I'm General Chopra. I want to focus on this open internet. When I walked into this hall, the Google head here gave me a card which said free expression. I think that's the core of the issue, free expression, and what Chandrasekhar said, open internet, and it's borderless. My point is, if you want to have internet neutrality, how do you affect it? Is it going to be self-regulatory, as some of you all have talked about? Or is it going to be the government which is totalitarian or authoritarian in India, in which we live? We're a democracy with an open society. I can't see this work at all. So what is the answer? In my view, one of the methods is that you have social media protestations and so on, in case there is any breaking of this rule. This would apply to the media also. Somebody mentioned the media and unbridled. In my view, our media today is going berserk, but you can't impose anything on our media unless it's self. And the point about security, throw the book. If somebody is breaching the security, we're not to worry about this free expression that I've talked about. And my second concern is, who will arbitrate? The arbitrator. If the arbitrator himself is flaunting internet norms, especially if it is global, how are we going to affect it? And my very small point, Chinmayi, I am rather surprised. I was chief of intelligence and also chief of TCS long, long ago. You are encouraging snooping by a political government. Even as the chief of intelligence, I would not dare to snoop, and not publicly. So I think if we encourage the government itself to snoop, then this kind of forum would be defeating the very purpose for which we've called it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Chinmayi, in case you have anything to add.
I'm sorry if I said something that could be interpreted as, is this better?
Yes.
Okay. Am I audible now? No, I said that I'm sorry if I said something that implied that I'm a fan of government snooping. Most of my writings on the subject would indicate quite the contrary. What I meant to say was that I think that it is a reality that we have to contend with, which is different from saying that one should encourage it. My point is very simply that if we try to develop policy on the basis that that important actors like governments are going to stop behaving in ways in which they have behaved for like hundreds of years, we will come up with policy that will not function. So my very limited point was that we should take into account that this is something that has been going on for years and to some degree will continue whether we like it or not, and work with that. That's it. I would certainly not encourage snooping.
Would anybody else like to respond? Okay.
I'm Vic Saxena from AKS IT Services. 100% localization is neither feasible nor a solution for data security. But localization is required. I just wanted to say a few things. Like we send a mail, either Gmail or Yahoo Mail, and it goes to either Singapore or US and comes back to you. But we are sending from across the table. Why the mail has to go there all the way? It's consuming bandwidth when we are sending across the table. So what is required? Either the internet exchange server, they should have address resolution then and there. If the mail belongs to the same country, why it is not routed directly over there? And the second point is that the government should bother more on giving clean pipe. Clean pipe, I mean to say, the bandwidth which you get, internet you get, it should be spam free, it should have malware free, and it should have DOS free traffic. If we all government should work on this, I think we can have a good internet and we can have certain amount of localization, what we say, technically which is wasting of bandwidth which is required.
Okay, interesting points. Would anybody on the panel want to respond to? Sir.
No, I think as we have all seen, striking a balance between these multiple opposing but all of them equally essential objectives is a challenge. And to arrive at an internationally accepted consensus on that is certainly a long haul. One can see that clearly. But is it possible to come up with a framework as a proposition which is based on internationally accepted principles, at least largely, which combines the three attributes of openness, for the reasons that have already been brought out, lawful access to enable governments to do the things that they need to do, but in accordance with law, and guaranteeing privacy, because we've seen many countries having concerns on that front also, and it's a zero-sum game between the lawful access and the privacy. And if we can combine these and create a sort of data-free port, as Parminder was suggesting, can that become a model which sets the pace? Can we be a trendsetter? And given the kind of role that the Indian industry plays, would that be something which can really provide a practical demonstration of a feasible framework? It's just a thought that I wanted to leave on the table, and maybe as comments are being received, whether that's a possibility and how it should look like.
Thank you. Parminder.
Yes, I would add to Chandrasekharji's 3 points, and this was what I wanted to earlier also in any case speak about. The fourth thing is about economics of data. I think this subject is not started to be treated at all in India. Who owns the data? Who has access to the value of data? The problem with privacy is people forego their privacy because they derive some value. And value of data and privacy of data are important to be treated together. Who owns the value which is derived from data? It's different forms of aggregation, and both at the individual level and as a group level where the data gets developed. And it's not just an abstract concept, because OECD is dealing with this subject, economics of data, in a very intergovernmental level. By the way, the same OECD doesn't want the UN to deal with the same subject at an intergovernmental level. But to bring up a point is that economics of data, I think, is very, very important, and we should start looking at it. That way India looks at it would be different from OECD looking at it, and I think there should be an international, kind of framework starting to think about it, added to the 3 which Chandrasekhar said. It's something which we should start thinking about.
Sir.
Mr. Anupam has mentioned about Google. Google has come to India because they thought some benefit is there, big market is there. They want to utilize the market under the threat that will close down. That's what you are trying to convey. Just hold on. In India, we are working under an entirely different environment. It is not prevalent either in USA or in Europe or in Australia or anywhere. We are surrounded by hostile countries, including Bangladesh, including Burma, including Sri Lanka and all that. We have to keep our eyes and ears open. And there has got to be some control regime. Not absolutely that you throttle that person cannot breathe. The best thing is, as pointed out by Mr. Deepak, the service provider and government, they have to come together. Both should know the requirement of each other so that business grow, economy grow, people grow. Otherwise, it cannot be one-sided affair. And as on this, the biggest espionage is on the industrial espionage. Missile, what type of fuses they are developing, what other things are going on, which type of hybrid car is coming, which will completely rule out the use of petrol and all that. I mean, though it is going at that high level. And espionage is not only from China or any this thing. Even Western countries are not lagging behind. They are snooping on us day and night. When our own government want to snoop, we make halla gulla. When some foreign countries, we just keep quiet and we swallow everything.
Sir, thank you, thank you. Let Dr. Chander respond to some of your
No, not Chander, it's open for all. Let anybody from audience reply.
Yeah, thank you.
And we are flooded with the foreign hardwares. Nobody is talking about the hardwares. Nobody is talking about we should manufacture servers in India. The servers which are located outside, they say we care to hoots for Indian laws.
Okay, sir.
Particularly Google on the China-India border. I spoke with the Survey of India officer. They were not talking openly. But when I pressed them against a wall, they said they don't bother about us. Same way, revolution in motion. It took 5 years for government of India to sort out that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So thank you very much, and I appreciate the dialogue. And so Professor Arun used John Rawls as a starting point. So as an academic, I'll feel free to follow in that vein and use Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative, you will recall, suggests something along the following lines. Act in a way that is universalizable. So the idea is to, kind of a form of the golden rule, which is the principle that you should follow, the rule that you should adopt, is one that should be adoptable by everyone, right? So I think that's a sensible kind of foundational principle for the internet generally, for governments as they act on the internet. That is, a government, if it wants to create a policy, should expect that that policy is only justifiable if all governments should adopt that same policy, right? The ultimate, I think, difficulty with, say, a data sovereignty policy is that if adopted, if universalized, it would have the impact of ending the World Wide Web, right? That's the logic of that policy, universalized. I, of course, agree with you that the United States has been awful about mass surveillance, both inside and outside the country. I'm not here defending that. I'm a huge critic of American mass surveillance policies, and so I think those are terrible. A data localization policy would not secure India against US mass surveillance. Angela Merkel's cell phone, Chancellor Merkel's cell phone, was tapped where? Not in DC when she visited, but in Berlin. Okay, this is the U.S. Surveillance apparatus does not operate entirely at home. So a data sovereignty policy that imagines that it will now remove itself from the purview of American spies by placing information within a country is a foolhardy one that denies the reality of American espionage across the world. Now, I think it's important for the Indian people, for the Indian government, to complain vociferously about American espionage. The Indian government's response was actually quite muted against espionage, and the Indian government's response was largely to say, wow, we should be doing the same thing. And I think that's the Immanuel Kant, worry, right? If it's done by one, it will be licensed for everyone to do. And I think it's a problematic approach. It's one where we all stand to lose, and I think so. I think that data localization is not a policy that actually improves security. I don't think that I would characterize all the neighbors as India as being in a peculiarly hostile environment. The United States feels, in a hostile environment too. All the countries of the world feel like they're living in a hostile environment. It's not India's sole kind of situation in the world. I was just in South Korea, where last year I visited the DMZ, which is only an hour or so from Seoul, right? And so India is not alone in living in a precarious world. But if we approach the world with fear, I think we're likely to undermine ourselves in the process.
Would anyone else from the panel like to respond?
No, very quickly. I thought you made some very interesting points, but no company in a country like India, which sort of upholds the rule of law, can hope to survive by giving it the cold shoulder. All of us are aware of this, and as an internet company, we are governed by certain legally backed principles. It's not that you constantly you are in constant confrontation with the government. I think that is a wrong characterization of the manner in which Google conducts itself in this country. And to, sir, give you a small piece of statistic which might be of interest to you. In 2010, globally, Google saw about 10,000 requests from governments, and in 2014, it went up to 35,000. And close to 70% of the requests that we got, we responded. We committed to responding to the best of our abilities. But wherever the request, the data request compromises our user interests, we will be a little more wary, right? So if the general, if the request is broad and sweeping and puts our user in a compromising position, then obviously, we will not respond to it, provided there are, legitimate reasons. In fact, in 2014, again, we took down 14 million YouTube videos, primarily because they were detrimental to the interests of a particular, issue, which the, which the world is confronted with. So these are things that are ongoing. In fact, a lot of times, voluntarily, we hand over URLs and whatever information and data we have on anything that is even remotely criminal or anything that aids and abets terrorist activities. So there's a lot of stories which perhaps are untold, which need to be brought to the fore, and perhaps there is a need to clear the air and be a little more direct in our own response. So I agree with you. We also have a role there in clearly articulating the kind of work that we are doing.
2012 or 2013,
yeah,
discussion took place between Survey of India and Google. Could you throw some light on that?
No, that's a different issue, and that's a different issue. No. So it is. There was an investigation which was underway. The investigation has cleared Google. So I don't think that we can discuss this offline, but in a public forum such as this, it might be completely unwarranted and a waste of other people's time. Thank you.
Okay, sir, your question, and do introduce yourself to the panel.
Commodore Gupta.
This question is for Mr. Maheshwari, really. Could you throw some light on the cloud that you were talking about, the government thing, Mekraj? And will the servers be in India or will they still be somewhere else?
So what we do know is that under the National E-Governance Plan, there's a concept of cloud computing usage by the government, and it has been named Meghraj. To the best of my knowledge, whatever documents, these documents are available on DIT's website and other places. As far as I know, those servers are going to be located within India. They are going to be operated by the government. As far as the government services are concerned, that's what I know. But at the same time, these documents are very much in the public domain.
And what I read about it was that it is going to be housed in India and they will offer services to other e-government services in various states, and so they can use Meghraj. Sir, please introduce.
Hello, I am Rubinder Singh. I am inventor, and no, I represent India at Expo 85. So this is technological sovereignty issue is very, very important. And very, very misunderstood in India. All the technologies in the world are available through patents, and we can download any technology which is, you can say publicly released by patent office a minute ago. I can download it immediately. That's one thing. Second thing is, we have to protect our intellectual property, and we can protect our intellectual property not just in India, all over the world. The technologies which we develop, for example, in India, we should be protecting that not just in India, all over the world. That we are not doing. We are, you can say misleading our people. Some of our people who don't have this understanding of intellectual property and technology, so they are misleading the country. We should be protecting every technology, and we should be protecting on worldwide basis. That is what Americans are doing. That is what China is doing now. That is what other countries are doing. Why we are not doing it? That's the issue. Thank you.
Sir, please introduce yourself.
My name is Kaul. I'm from healthcare. It's not statement actually which I'm making here. I'm telling my experience, like recently a couple of things which I've done, and it was very interesting. Since I belongs to healthcare, so I approached to MCI to get some rules and regulation about the digitization. So here we are talking for the localization. So, in hospital, you will find big rooms, big places where files are dumped. Like, it's very difficult whenever audits coming, people are going and they're coming with the say, sir, I haven't got file. So it's difficult. So localization and digitization is very much required in that. So I was trying to figure out, and then I approached to a couple of vendors, and they given me offer for the cloud-based document management system, which I really liked it. And I had gone for that without knowing any rules and regulation. And parallelly, I was struggling with the MCI, and I got a very interesting reply from the MCI saying that there is a para 34 says you can keep 3 years data online, non-digital format, and rest you can digitize it. And I read it's a one-liner statement, and I was surprised. Anyways, so I decided let's build your rule and regulation and do that. I did it. I did the entire 10-year digitization of data, and beyond 3 years files I have destroyed as per the law, and rest 3 years files, the current 3 years files were remaining there. So it's very useful, and another challenge which I faced, since it was on a cloud, so I wanted to go for the another cloud. There was no, rule and regulation where I can cross-platform, cross-service provider, I can transfer my data. So that's one of the biggest. So now here, another experience came, which is a cross-country legal challenges. There are several things we do there. In India, we do outsourcing. If anything, belongs, let's say in US, any data has SSO number, that data cannot go. They are very clear. This project cannot go to India because it has some kind of information which is defined in a rule, cannot go beyond their boundaries. So my question is to the chairperson, can we have some kind of rules and regulation in India so that like we can protect such kind of information. I mean, people are always in the dark. They don't know what to do. I can win the project because I have a best team, but I cannot win the project because there are some legalities issue, right? Second thing is how I can basically talk to the cross cloud providers, because so many people are advising go for the cloud, go for the cloud. Same cloud provider is having a setup in Singapore and Malaysia and India. Is that the right way of doing it? I mean, if one side we are saying, okay, I cannot send my data out, but the cloud provider has three-way presence. He can communicate easily. Thank you.
Yeah.
So let me just take up just that last point. So I think that's a really wonderful set of stories. The fact that some companies in the United States are saying we can't outsource to India because this healthcare information can't be processed there because it includes a social security number is really undermines American consumers who can't access world-class services coming out of India. And it harms economic development in India because they can't provide global services to American companies. And I think that's problematic. I'm not sure that that's actually literally a legal requirement in the United States. It's all a question of what are the particular provisions in the particular data set that's governing that particular data set. There's no general prohibition on outsourcing, period. Sorry.
Yeah. In a way we are progressing. If you see the kind of a Prime Minister digitization program where everything has to be linked with your Aadhaar. All kind of program, ration card, driving license, bank, and everything is. So similarly, like we are progressing as USA have done long back, right? So there, I see some kind of apprehension sharing data right now.
Sure. So, and I think so. That's shows you the alarming nature of data localization, right? If that is indeed a rule, it prevents Indian economic development, which I think is super important. And I think in this context, I really wanted to refer back and to Mr. Chandrasekhar's kind of three principles that he suggested, which were openness, lawful access, and guarantees of privacy. I think that is a great framework, set of principles that would allow. There's no reason to think that social security numbers are unsafe because they came to India. Do you think that? I don't think that. Are they safe because they go to Iowa and they're unsafe because they come to Bangalore? The practices of Indian outsourcing companies about security are probably far better than the practices of an Iowa-based company. Okay, so that is again why American consumers are harmed, because we don't get the benefit of global services and the competition that they have. So I think India should then say, look, should catalog all these objectionable processes elsewhere and say, we are not going to follow a similar route ourselves, okay? Because, an eye for an eye only makes the whole world blind, but it also is not a particularly effective economic development tool. Rather, saying, there's a better way to approach these things. We believe that we can send an Aadhaar information overseas without feeling that it's jeopardized. We just ask that it be treated securely and with and the privacy respected. That I think is the better solution to this important problem.
Just one second part of what he said about the data portability, and that reminds me of what Lawrence Lessig said, that code is law and policy architecture is policy. So we have spoken of localization by policy, but not localization by architecture, which is a huge problem, which some different kind of actors do. And that localization under quotes by architecture is a huge problem. And that interoperability should at least be as important as the localization by policy. I just thought I'll bring this point.
So
Thank you. We have 2 comments at the back. Oh, sorry, Chinmayi, dear.
just a quick
Yeah.
clarification that requiring that your Aadhaar be linked with any government benefits, that's illegal according to the Supreme Court order. I know that there are circulars asking you to
Sir.
Sorry. I am Colonel Haridas. I am from CLAW, Center for Land Warfare Studies. I've got 2 things to share. I am from a government sector, and we are talking about localization. I have one view on localization. Any government sector, in spite of knowing there are technologies available in the form of anonymizing data, masking of data, or a third-party non-disclosure agreement, we are very skeptical of sharing data with a third party. So as far as localization of the data is concerned, to overcome these things when you are telling about this to your hierarchy who are in the decision-making process, at least if some kind of localization of data is thought about and not consider that as the whole fault line which lies with technological sovereignty and open internet, it would be something which we should deliberate upon. My second view is on the commercial companies. Don't we think the people who are making, monetizing or commercializing the data, don't they have any responsibility towards my data, towards me? It is my data on which they are working. It is the data related to my organization on which they are monetizing. It is the data related to a whole group of such people on which the commercial aspects are being looked upon. So when this data is the one on which they are using pattern analytics, they are using predictive analytics, and based on this, there are huge commercial gain with this organizations are accruing. So don't these organizations or don't these companies have a responsibility towards me? On my data, they are making this money. Thank you.
So to your last point, I thought absolutely very valid, pertinent concerns. But this goes back to my earlier response. So the reason why we don't jeopardize or compromise on our users' data when there are random requests coming our way is precisely for this reason, because we hold our users above everything else. That's number one. And number two, we also have something called as the data dashboard. So as a user, if you want a clear-cut picture to know, how exactly, Google is sort of, how exactly your data is flowing in the overall Google product scheme of things, you can get a snapshot of that. One. And two, tomorrow if you want to leave, some of our applications and products and move out, you can take the data with you and, and log out. So it's not that the company sort of locks you in and ensures that the data that you have over a period of time accumulated, continues to reside even if you want to opt out. So there is a certain amount of sensitivity and a certain amount of, responsiveness that we tend to sort of discharge as a company.
One more comment, referring to your earlier point, as well as to a point that was made here. We were in a similar forum having this conversation on data localization, and the fear of, obviously, of the protection of your identity and security concerns that arise around it. And within that forum, there was, I think, one of the largest private Indian banks in India, and it's amazing how technology offers you a solution. One of the interesting problems they had was on interest computation, which normally, if it were to be done manually in India, would take anywhere between 5 to 10 working days. They've managed to route that data using cloud computing resources internationally. However, what they've done is keeping the RBI requirements in place, is connecting the last dots, which is the calculations to the account information to your individual information. That last mile is done only in India. So that's what I mean. Technology can offer solutions, and that entire piece of work is now done within a period of 24 hours to 36 hours. so there are technologies available, there are solutions available. Policy is not always the best answer in some of these cases.
Thank you. I think, okay, let's take, so you've been waiting, I know. So we'll take two last comments and then we'll...
So my name is Ram N. Kumar, and my question is to Ms. Lobo. As we say, data particularly is used for a company or for particular purpose. That can be used for that purpose. If we use the same data to churn out insights for whatever other purposes, is it legal? And if it in any which way jeopardize the sovereignty and the open internet scenario?
My colleagues around the table probably will have a better answer to that. However, it all depends on the rights that a user has, and I guess that's very important. So I'm coming in from a very user perspective, and obviously not solely as a BSA perspective here, but it is important to you is to understand what services you're using, whether it's online or offline, and the kind of access of data that you are allowing those companies to use. I think many times, often enough, we'll scroll down, we'll say accept, and we go ahead without really taking and doing the due diligence that is necessary to protect our own data. Like our friends from Google mentioned, there are several options to opt out. And I think we need to be more aware as citizens and as users of technology to opt out of options that are available.
Last week, International Telecom Union, which is they had published a cybersecurity index, and it may be surprising to some people. The fact is that out of about 100 odd countries that they did the survey, only 7 countries are ahead of India on cybersecurity index. So I think there's some positive thing happening there also. The second thing is we should also look at this whole thing around data localization within the context which of course is business, but I would say in a particular dimension that the government is talking about is ease of doing business. So as long as there are things which are making things about ease of doing business, as long as these are facilitating and doing that, I think that's a positive thing. At the same time, just because there are certain apprehensions, might be better to lay out those requirements that yes, okay, these are the things that we want you to comply with and why, and then leave the mechanics of that to the individual businesses to comply with that, or let's say, as people are using the term, opt out in case somebody does want to do that. That's their own volition and their own call. But ultimately, it is much better to define, okay, these are the things that we want you to do and why, and after that leave the mechanics largely to the individual people to respond. So for example, if there is a requirement that to operate somewhere, you need to have an office. Now beyond that, you leave it to the people that, okay, whether you want to buy a property, whether you want to build your own office or you want to go to a business center. I mean, those are the type of things where it is much better to leave it to the market forces.
Okay, since we're getting close to lunch, we'll take a quick last comment.
Well, ma'am, I'm Major Chakravarti, and my question is straight away to Google. And when he said there's no need for a regulator, now let me put it very clearly. Any data is always attractive. Even my own characteristics, let's say I am a soldier, whether I am suffering from hypertension interests somebody in Pakistan and what you call China. Believe me, if I'm a general. This is the first truth. So let's forget any, and this is, as he has very correctly, I think Mr. Maheshwari brought out, we are very well off because we are number 7. But please understand there are 6 people ahead of us. I don't want to name them, who are also looking at us very deeply. And please, industrialists fight the greatest battles, and their battle is all about data. How do you do this without a regulator? Today, in the United States, they appointed, you have a cyber command. The entire data control is under the military today, and the president is the next person. How can Google say it should be purely political? Now, politicians have no definite ideologies. They keep changing their promises every second. And technology, there is no stop for technology. Unless you have a regulator, and as I think correctly brought out, there's some control. I'm not saying that data is to be confined to borders. Forget borders, it'll possibly go to even outer space. Without a regulator, how is India functioning? And very rightly, I think number 7 is no position to be proud of. In such battles, you have to be either a winner or a loser. Like in the army, we don't have even a place for a silver medalist. You either win a battle or today my dead body would be there. So I'd like Google to tell me, he said, no regulator, only politics. And both are people who work in open visions, no borders. Please give me the answer.
So what I meant was, in the context of our discussions, what would be perhaps important when it comes to data localization is to have a political response by way of bilateral agreements, by way of negotiations, where you arrive, as Mr. Chandrasekhar mentioned, where you arrive at a framework which in a way balances all these opposing forces. That's what I meant. And secondly, there is a need for the problem to also be looked at from a technically feasible standpoint. You know, you have encryption technologies today which can ensure that you have the same degree of, you know, safety. You know, the average user can have the same degree of safety today, and it does not need an intrusive government to sort of come in and, you know, access your data. So what I was trying to say was essentially, in the context of the data localization regime, there is a need for, you know, more discussion and debate to precisely arrive at the framework that he mentioned.
Technologies are really a hoax. Iran has today broken a UAV technology of the United States, got a UAV down, and now flown the same UAV back. What are we talking of encryption? I am a soldier in this subject, sir, a practitioner. I deal with your Google Maps, I deal with your fly-by-wire, and I know how to fool you also. I'm being very frank with you. See, please, let's not, if we are gathered here just to have a talk where we keep patting our backs, I think at the end of the day we can just go and sleep. I'm telling you frankly, let's be very frank, Iran has no great shakes. I don't think it is in his 6th list. Iran today is doing the maximum cyber warfare. We are talking of United States, we have got the US deputy, I think he's just gone away. The US, the DCM was here. I mean to say today Iran is number 1 in cyber warfare. It's doing with all your industries.
Madam, I want Indian question. I want to ask something Indian.
So everybody wants to ask right before lunch. Okay, I'll give you 30 seconds exactly.
Madam, actually, we are not producing, you can say, correct data. You know, even our Prime Minister sometimes, you know, say that, you know, we had 10% growth, but, you know, when there is drought. So, you know, there is no law regarding that. But my concern is that, you know, regarding IPR issue. For example, I write something, you know, some blog, you know, within few minutes, you know, somebody changed 1 or 2 lines in the headlines, you know, and publish it as its own. Can't Google, you know, say that, you know, this is similar article has appeared, you know, just 1 minute ago or 10 minutes ago? Similar kind of thing, you know.
Thank you.
So, you know, sometimes, you know, my, you know, thing is not available on Google, you know, but the other thing is available.
Okay.
So can't you do something on this? Because this is simple for you, I think.
You know, I will attempt to respond to your question, but, you know, that's precisely what the problem is. So tomorrow, if you are looking at data localization to happen, there would be a severe limitation in terms of bringing in comparable data sets, right? So at this point in time, you're able to at least compare various data sets that reside, you know, across our borders. So it is important for us to ensure that we deal with this with a certain degree of inclusivity, rather than remain sort of insulated and focus on an extremely narrow point of view. So I agree with you.
Okay, Professor Chander, the floor is yours.
So in the United States, the conversation is about 3D printing, the Internet of Things, about the technologies, about artificial intelligence, about cars that drive, about smart things that are going to transform our lives, right? The conversation is not about kind of the old internet of the year 2000 or 2005. So if we approach the internet with this kind of old mindset, India is going to be the laggard in thinking about the internet. It's not going to be at the forefront, and India should be at the forefront. And I think it's important to think about the future, not about thinking about what has happened in the past. the past is super important, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, we ignore the past. We learn from the past, but we have to think about the ways that technology is enabling these, the young people of India, which are going to be the young people of the world, to create things and platforms for the future. Thanks.
Thank you so much for being a great audience. And it is clear that despite the fact that there's so much expertise in our panel, does think on a similar line, there is a lot of understanding left about data localization, what the internet is, which direction it's heading in. And so we have our job cut out for us. Thank you so much. Thanks so much.